Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another webinar in our 2025 series. We are very privileged to have Mark Reich join us from the US today. So thanks for tuning in, Mark, from your Friday morning. And Mark, as you see here on the page, will be giving us a wonderful overview of the book that he has just authored and started to put out to the marketplace around managing on purpose, talking about a concept of Hoshin Connery, a wonderful concept to develop strategy, teams, grow leaders, and drive innovation across our enterprises. So I think many of us have maybe heard of this term, Hoshin Connery, but aren't so familiar with it. So Mark has given me more than enough notification that we'll cover that in detail today for you to come up to speed as well. And just a little bit about Mark as well. He spent 23 years working for Toyota, all the way back starting in 1988. And that includes 6 years in Japan in the overseas planning division, where he had responsibilities for product planning and working with other chief engineers to define vehicle specifications for all the overseas markets. And that was critical for that time with Toyota when they were introducing Lexus to the rest of the world. And then Mark's journey brought him back to the US, transitioned to TSSC, which is the Toyota Supplier Support Center. And that's dedicated to applying the TPS, Toyota Production System, to manufacturing. And that opened the door for Mark also to work in TPS beyond the manufacturing setting and other applications such as healthcare, nonprofits, and many others. And as you see too, if you've read a little bit more about Mark, or as you'll hear from his bio, has had a wonderful background working across different companies and sectors, and we're very fortunate to have his expertise shine through not only in this book we're going to learn more about, but also in just some of the commentary and the stories that I'm sure Mark will tell us. So thank you again, Mark. We're going to field any questions throughout the day. Please, as usual, just put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and then we'll come to those at the end of the session. But please stick around for that. We'd love to have some dialogue with you to end today's webinar. But Mark, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over for you to get us going.
Thank you, Ben. It's great to be with all of you, and I appreciate the invite from the Lean Africa Institute to join and share some of the concepts in my book. I'm going to talk about that today, mostly about my book, but I think I'll provide you with some practical thinking around it as well. The book is meant to be practical, and maybe share with you a case study of how this has worked in an organization. So maybe just for clarification up front, our relationship, Ben, my relationship with Lean Africa Institute. I'm a member of the Lean Enterprise Institute, which is kind of the founding institute of a network of about 35 institutes now that are around the world. And we are headquartered in Boston, a nonprofit established by a gentleman by the name of Jim Womack back in 1997. And there are many other institutes are now pretty much, I think we're on every continent now, except for Antarctica, Ben. Okay, so today I want to talk about managing on purpose. That's what this slide says. I'm going to share with you a little more in depth about my career so that you're what Ben shared with you. I think it's relevant to the content today, and so I'll go into that. But this book is about now subtitle. I'll just read the subtitle: Using Hoshin Connery to Develop Strategy, Align Teams, Grow Leaders, and Innovate Your Enterprise. So I want to talk a little bit about what Hoshin Connery is. I'm going to introduce it, like what the concept is, what the book and why I wrote the book, and then share with you my experience and some experience in the industry. So, sorry, let me make sure. There we go. So this is a quote from the foreword of my book. The foreword was written by Jeff Liker and John Shook. If you're familiar with and you're in the lean world, you may have heard that from these two gentlemen. I worked closely with both of them, while I was in Toyota. John and I worked together, but also since Toyota. And maybe just take a moment and read that quote. I'm not going to read it for you. So I would refer to this. It's referred to by John and Jeff in the book as Nirvana. I would call it. I'll call it. Let's call it True North. But I think it represents it's a good representation of what organizations should strive to be, I believe. And Hoshin Kanri can be helpful in that. And so what is it? What is Hoshin Kanri, and what do we want to talk about today? It is and this I will read because it's the definition that's in my book, if you've looked at it. Hoshin Kanri is a management system for strategy that defines midterm and long-term direction, those objectives and targets, and annually builds alignment horizontally and vertically to the direction, manages annual execution to the direction, and develops capability of people throughout the organization. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but when I worked, Ben mentioned I worked about 23 years in Toyota. That was what I experienced it to be, and I'll go into a little more depth and explained what my specific experience was, and what Hoshin Kanri is. Hoshin Kanri, though, as a methodology, was developed in Japan. It was built off of the quality movement, TQM, that came out of Edward Deming's teachings, if you're familiar with Edward Deming. It was adopted originally by Toyota in 1963. A couple of very key individuals who were instrumental in that were Mr. Nemoto and Mr. Sugiura. I happened to meet Mr. Sugiura, by the way, when I published my book back in April. He's still alive at 91 and very healthy. But those two people were instrumental in bringing it into Toyota. It was utilized primarily in Toyota, and actually a couple other companies introduced it at the same time, to Bridgestone and others in Japan, to establish a strong improvement methodology based on PDCA in planning functions and to build leader capability. So Toyota believed that quality was important not only at on the manufacturing floor or in design, but should be approached in all administrative areas. And Hoshin Kanri is introduced to support that and to develop strategy and execute on it. As it mentions in this last slide, it's utilized, as I just mentioned, to build leader capability. So I want to share a little bit about my personal story. I ended up working for Toyota for 23 years. I retired from Toyota as an executive. That's when I came to the Lean Enterprise Institute. So in some ways, I think no example each person is somewhat unique in terms of the development path, but I think sharing my development path might be helpful in understanding how Toyota develops leaders, of which Hoshin Kanri is one methodology. So I went to Japan in the 80s, coming out of college. The US economy was kind of not in great shape. The Japanese economy was booming, for anybody who remembers this. And I went to Japan in 85. I studied went to graduate school studying Japanese. Eventually, I was hired from graduate school, I met my wife in Japan, decided to stay in Japan for a while. And I heard about the job in Toyota through my school and interviewed, and I got a job working for Toyota in 1988. I was assigned to the overseas planning division. As Ben mentioned, we worked closely with chief engineers to coordinate and plan product, both pricing, content, and supply. But even before I had a chance to go to the office, Toyota sent me to our Sutsumi factory, which is a plant right in Toyota City that makes Camrys. Toyota has a plant in Kentucky that makes Camrys as well. This plant made Camrys. I was asked to work for 3 months on the assembly line, which was unexpected. I didn't realize that was going to happen. That was where I was sent on my first day. And I spent 3 months building bumpers. Now, I'm about 190 centimeters tall, 6'2". So I couldn't actually physically work on the assembly line. They had a 180 centimeter height limitation to the design of the assembly line. So I worked on an offline process that fed directly to the assembly line and built bumpers for 3 months. It was tough work. But Toyota, I realized in the course of that every team member that joins Toyota spends 3 months building cars. And they do that because they want everyone to know, wherever function you go in, that this is where the value is created for the customer. And this is what the customer pays for. And it's really hard work. So wherever you are, your responsibility as you go through your career in Toyota, and most people stay their whole career, Toyota has very low turnover, that you always remember that first experience, that difficult experience. And that's the work that's adding value for the customer, and you support those people. Toyota also asks everyone to sell cars for 3 months. And that gives you, of course, the experience of what it's like to understand the interaction with the customer. At that time, I'm not sure now, but at that time, Toyota actually sold cars door to door. So finally, I got an opportunity to go to the office into my job in overseas planning division. In that first week, I was assigned a mentor, and this individual had been with the company 6 or 7 years. He was responsible for taking care of everything, starting from where the bathrooms were, to working with my boss, to helping me uh, solve my first problem. Because that first week, I was also assigned a problem to solve. I did my first, something we call A3. You might be familiar with that. It's a problem solving methodology in Toyota. I was assigned that problem. And honestly, it was difficult. I probably revised that A3. This is before computers, by the way, 1988. I hand revised that A3 probably 10 to 12 times. My mentor helped me. Finally, I had a chance to present it to my manager, and he reviewed it, asked me some questions, and then asked me some questions and asked me, so what's your feeling about this experience? And being the honest American I kind of said, wow, this is one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. I feel I've added very little value. And his response was interesting. He said, you're right, which kind of surprised me because I thought I joined Toyota, and Toyota was a company that treasured value. But then he said something that lasted with me the rest of my career. And that was that you're not expected to add a lot of value your first 3 years. You're here to learn. Uh, of course, over the course of your career, you're going to learn a lot, and you will definitely add value to the organization. But please look at this opportunity you just had as a learning opportunity. And so I ended up staying with Toyota for 23 years. Hopefully, I had a couple decades of value that I added to the organization. Okay, so there I was. I ended up getting a job that transferred me back to the United States. Here I left my job where I added no value, moved back to the US, and I joined an organization called the Toyota Supplier Support Center. And I joined that as a manager in the organization, and Toyota set up this organization, TSSC, in 1992 as a fairly unique organization in the world, I think, for Toyota. I would say it's unique among many industries. TSSC was set up to share, Toyota became known for the Toyota production system, and they set up TSSC in the US, in North America, Canada, US, Mexico, to share the thinking and practice of the Toyota production system. In the beginning, it was with any company that was interested, and didn't charge anything for it. There's a charge for it now, but we helped a lot of Toyota suppliers, but additionally, we helped other manufacturing companies, and now that organization has branched out to help many other groups, including healthcare, nonprofits, etc. My fourth step in my career is probably most relevant to today's conversation. Eventually, as a general manager and executive, I was assigned to the corporate strategy group at our headquarters, and took over responsibility to learn Hoshin Kanri and to develop it in North America. This was at a time when North America was going through a huge transition. This is like the year in 2000 through 2010. Our sales, as well as our production footprint, tripled during the course of that decade, and that created a huge amount of challenges for the organization. And it required we hire people very quickly, develop their capability much faster. And so I kind of got in the middle of that, and Hoshin Kanri was very effective and critical for us to define that future direction. So I'm going to go into depth a little bit more about what that is. I eventually decided to leave Toyota after 23 years in 2011. I joined the Lean Enterprise Institute, where I've been since then. And a lot of organizations started to call me because I had this corporate strategy and Hoshin Kanri experience, and asked me to come see what they did. When I went out, I often saw this gap that I have written on this slide. What I had learned in Toyota was, to me, the target state, which is strategy is something that happens up and down the organization. It's also vision is established, but it's also that vision is executed upon, and it produces sustained business results. This is what happened in Toyota for us. The current state I often saw at organizations is strategy was this thing that was developed by a few people at the top. It was often represented by a vision, which might be on a website or it was up on a wall at best, and people could walk by and see it. And organizations had this kind of, they represented their strategy through some isolated episodic initiatives or outcomes, projects they worked on. So I saw a big gap, as you can already imagine, based on the career I just explained to you in Toyota, is that in the capability to execute on the vision that's been developed, the engagement of staff, problem solving, and the development of a rigorous management system in particular. And I want to talk about that last point through the course of today. So, excuse me. So it over the course of the last since that time I started those visits, particularly over the course of the last 7-8 years, I've worked with a lot of organizations in, I would say, just about every industry: healthcare, uh, construction, of course, manufacturing, the hospitality industry, and I kind of see this opposing view of what Hoshin Kanria is, having what I learned in Toyota versus traditional strategy. And I look at it relative to purpose and process as well as people. Uh, so purpose is that for Hoshin Kanri is really to deliver sustainable business results for three key stakeholders: the customer, employees, and the company. Whereas what I often see in traditional strategy, as I've been out in the field, is to deliver quarterly financial results. Particularly, and I'm speaking particularly with the U.S. in mind. I'm not sure of the situation in South Africa or Africa. The process, though, is related to Hoshin Kanri. Is in Toyota, we focused on the vital few, and I recommend organizations to look at 3 to 5 initiatives for the company. It's both a top-down and bottom-up process, and it's based on plan, do, check, act, and I'll talk about that. In traditional strategy, I would go to companies where there's 30 or 40 initiatives that have been defined, and so that it's difficult for leadership to decide what to focus on and what to prioritize. There's a focus only on results. It's very top down, and that top down comes along with the nature of it being pretty functional in terms of silos. But the biggest maybe contrast relates to people. In Toyota, Hoshin Kanri was something that engaged all employees. It challenged them, employees, with support. It provided an excellent structure for leader development. And that was all based on some Gemba understanding of what the issues were in the Gemba. Traditional strategy, to me, seems what I've seen is it's some communication that often just cascades to the organization from executives. It's a structure often just for executive accountability, not for development. And instead of that Gemba-based understanding, there's a reliance often on reports. So while working, since I left Toyota, I was able to meet an individual who had this gentleman I mentioned earlier, Mr. Sugiura, who was one of the founding people who established Hoshin Kanri and Toyota. I got a chance to meet a gentleman by the name of Mr. Yoshino, who worked with Mr. Sugiura, who worked in the corporate planning office of Toyota. And I want to share a little bit about what he says about what the meaning and how Toyota worked, how Hoshin worked in Toyota. I think that's a good summary of what Hoshin was in Toyota from Mr. Yoshino. So, having seen, I laid out for you what my career journey was, how I was exposed to this strategy methodology, Hoshin Kanri. I had the opportunity to work with many organizations over the last many years, and I realized it would be helpful. I'm not going to be able to work with everybody. And I am to some extent a subject, I know this subject fairly deeply, both into it and outside. So I decided to write a book for the Lean Enterprise Institute. It's a workbook. I wanted to pass on my learning from Toyota to other organizations. And I learned some some of the key themes that come out in the book, and I'll speak a little bit more to it, is it's applicable in any industry. That's been my experience. And it's meant to, I try to convey that in the book. It creates sustained business results through both vision and rigorous PDCA. It tells you that good plans are essential, but sticking too rigidly to a plan is detrimental. In the case study that appears in the book, they have to adjust their plan mid-year because of some of the things that are happening in the business environment. It helps to accelerate continuous improvement efforts, I believe, both up, down, and across the organization. And it helps to break down silos. So let me talk a little bit about that. Uh, the structure and content of the book. It's a practical workbook. Now, the Lean Enterprise Institute and our institutes are known for workbooks, actually. Some of the more well-known books we've created are like Learning to See, the value stream mapping book written by John Shook as a workbook. But we haven't published one in about 10 years. And I wanted to make something that was practical, that people could use, that it wasn't just theory. So the book kind of is meant to convey some fundamental thinking, but also practical application and tools you can use in your organization as you apply Hoshin Kanri. The story within the book is based on a case study of a company called True Mowers, and it follows their year-plus journey as Hoshin Kanri PDCA is established in the organization. It also goes into some level of depth about what's the relationship of Hoshin Kanri, the strategic planning and execution, daily management, and problem solving, A3. It delves also into the mechanics of how you take Hoshin at a corporate level and break it down, how you connect that to strategy and problem solving A3s, how you use something called OBEA, which I'll talk about in more detail. And it shares with you, maybe that last point on this slide is what we call Hoshin in action, which is real life scenarios from various industries of companies that have tried this based on the work I've done with them and others have as well. So one fundamental concept that's in the book, I want to share a few of them, and then I want to go into a case a little bit and explain to you how it's been applied, is that Hoshin Kanri is a process. So one of the things I bring out in the book is, as an example, is like every morning we all get up and we brush our teeth. And nobody ever has probably written down how they brush their teeth, but we have a process. There's a process that I replicate. I just brushed my teeth probably about an hour ago. You did it earlier in the day. Hopefully you're doing it for lunch and dinner. But everyone kind of has a standard process they follow. And the fact is, pretty much everything in our lives is a process, and things we do in company is a process too. So Hoshin Kanri, or strategy, can be defined as a process. This slide is meant to kind of convey at a very high level what that is. And like any process, Hoshin has inputs, which can be things like market analysis, what's the business environment, what's our customer inputs, team member inputs, how are we doing relative to our daily managing of the business, what does the board have to say if you're a public company, or what the external organizations have to say? And what's your long-term vision or plan? All those can be inputs to a process of defining your objectives for the year and your activity plans and targets, which hopefully create some outputs like new and improved products and services, new and improved processes or capabilities that result in good outcomes, which is sustainably better business performance, things like profitability, market share. We don't start from that and work backwards. A process has inputs and outputs. Another fundamental concept in the book is the PDCA, which I've already mentioned a couple times. But that represents, many of you may be familiar with this, Plan, Do, Check, Act. The book is structured that way. So it starts with how do we go about that triangle at the top? How do you go about grasping your initial condition, which is what I just explained, kind of those inputs and where you stand now, a reflection from the previous year. And then you develop your Hoshin through your planning. You execute on that. And within that execution, you may have short cycles of plan, do, check, act. Eventually, though, you review how you did versus your plan, what your results were. And then in the act part, you may continue initiative for another year, another 2 years, longer term. Or you may say, this is something we've resolved, and we can now move that to daily management. And speaking of that point, this illustration is in the book. It's meant to show that there is a relationship and difference between Hoshin Kanri and daily management. Look, Hoshin Kanri or strategy are the things we need to consider to stay competitive in our market, in the wherever we are. And think about the time horizon of a year, 5 years, a decade. At the same time, to be competitive, we need to have strong fundamental daily management systems. We need to, like, for example, as Toyota as a manufacturer, we need to ensure we had produced, for example, about 500 cars a day off an assembly line based on customer demand that are good quality. So there's an important linkage and marriage between those two systems. If you just do Hoshin Kanri without daily management, you get this episodic, not sustained impact. If you do daily management, you will get sustained impact. That's going to involve everyone in continuous improvement every day. But that can be gradual. What a nice combination is innovative leaps in the organizational business through Hoshin Kanri and new initiatives, while also and then transitioning those to daily management so you can continuously improve. That I think provides the highest acceleration of improvement for an organization based on what I've learned and seen. And I want to share an example with you over the course of the next several slides and show you in the context of the book how this particular organization utilized some of the thinking and practice. The company is a company called Turner Construction. They are the largest construction company in the United States, about a $25 billion company. If you've ever traveled to the U.S., you may well have come to New York City. They probably build about half the skyline of that city. New York is one of their largest markets. So the Lean Enterprise Institute became involved with Turner Construction in 2017, and we've had we continue that relationship up through now, so close to a decade. One of the things we introduced to Turner was this idea of management PDCA. And so you can see that as we think about at Turner, what were they doing in terms of their inputs and what was their Hoshin development? Well, one of their inputs, an important input to understand why Turner focused on certain strategic objectives as we collaborated with them, is to think about the construction industry in general. So I don't know about I have known nothing, I'm sorry, about the construction industry in South Africa, but I do know that the construction industry in the United States is pretty abysmal when it comes to safety. In fact, 1 in 5 deaths occur in the construction industry, workplace deaths, not deaths in general, but workplace deaths. Often those are caused by slips, trips, and falls. And it shows you over the course of time, this shows over years that situation has not gotten so much better. So Turner recognized this. They recognized that they are a leader in the construction industry. They're well known, and they decided as an organization it's important to take something like this very seriously. So they built something what we call Strategy A3. It's introduced. This is the concept that's introduced in the book on managing on purpose. Strategy A3 is kind of meant to define, okay, based on that issue related to safety, how will the organization tackle that? And how can they use Hoshin Kanri as a process to help with that? Understanding what the business goals are, understanding what the current process is, and how people get developed, and what are the management systems that support it. And what would be our ideal and our target state for the next year? And then what's our action plan to kind of address that issue? So Turner created an A3 like this in terms of its application relative to Hoshine, but also relative to safety. And the priorities that came out of that were four, basically. And this is in 2020, after we'd been working with Turner for a few years. They picked four like corporate priorities as as for our Hoshine objectives, I would call them. Improving safety, increasing staff capabilities, increased sales, reducing write-downs. And I want to focus in their case on in what they've considered about safety. So they introduced something they call to Turner. Turner had been thinking about safety for a long time. There were a lot of mechanisms that they had in place, but they weren't working so effectively. And they decided to do something they call introducing caring into safety. And this is an example of the Hoshine that they developed for 2020 that focused on safety. I won't go to this in huge amount of depth relative to this, but you can see on this slide, like their objective was to achieve zero injuries, which is of course maybe a true north objective, and why they would want to do that and what were the goals relative to that. And then they defined some very clear activities this is within their New York business unit. That's what MYBU is, that they would focus on to improve safety. One was what's highlighted in red is to establish a structure of weekly review and observation of pre-task plans across all projects. So what that means, pre-task plan is a plan that that work unit, and Turner employs a lot of contracted trade labor. What they're going to do, like if you're going to build a room today, what is the specific plan for that? And what are the tasks involved? And what are potential safety hazards that might exist? So making sure those are handled in a rigorous basis. And also they targeted observing, the second one you can see, observing and improving work to reduce hard work. Turner then went through, after defining those priorities, and I just gave you an example. There was a lot more extent to the other priorities, but let's focus on the safety one. They executed on that. And how did they go about executing on their strategy? In the book, we introduced something called Obeya, which is it's a room. This is a picture from the book that visualizes progress through the course of the year. Now, Hoshine is a long-term thing. So if you don't want to wait until mid-year or end of year to know how you did, which a lot of companies do. And Obeya where you can gather and review progress and visualize it. It helps to build leader capability to understand how to coach when problems occur. And it's excellent and utilizes excellent tools to support, such as Gantt charts and other methodologies to kind of support how you're doing relative to progress of the plan you put forth. So Turner utilized that methodology. They also set up a system. This is their kind of, I know this is kind of small type, but it just shows to represent on a monthly basis, they reviewed the progress of what was happening in this room. And based on that, and when I say review progress, they reviewed how they're doing relative to those activities I explained in the Hoshine. And the senior vice president of the organization, the top person in the organization, took responsibilities to kind of review that and provide feedback and coaching to others. They also implemented another concept from the book that's called, I refer to and go into some depth about in Managing on Purpose, called vertical catchball. And that is the concept where a manager can give an assignment, a general assignment to provide initial objectives and direction to an organization, to maybe a team member, and that team member can use that opportunity to think through that challenge, get inputs and required, and draft their own thinking about what to do, and then get some clarification and coaching. This is actually similar concept to the A3 concept, but it helps create entrepreneurial innovation in the organization. And so this is maybe the practice. I won't go into depth on this slide, but this is an example from the book, and the practical way that you can take the corporate level Hoshine and break it down to department level to understand the what, the why, and the how you'll execute on the strategy you've put together. In the case of the book, the example this is sharing is this True Mowers I mentioned in the book is a lawnmower company, and they need a big priority for them is to launch the electric mower. So this is some of the practical content they put together as a leadership team, and then for the next level down on how they would execute on launching that electric mower. In Turner's case, what they did is they established what they called co-learning calls related to this safety issue. And that was meant to be, these calls were set up to be, sorry, I'm getting interruption from this, or Otter, our recording device, excuse me. These co-learning calls were set up to understand when a safety problem happens in the field, it will be communicated effectively quite quickly in the organization. It's based on standardized fact-based problem solving, and it's based on a committed time frame to resolve the issue. So in Turner's case, the senior vice president of the organization said, if an incident occurs on any job site in New York, I want to know within 48 hours, and I want to hear what the countermeasure is and how we're going to share that across the organization. So this actually created a good framework for driving continuous improvement among Turner staff, vendors, and workers. And that supports a concept that's in the book about the fact that problems can, as you see, as I'm laying out this example, problems get solved up, down, and across the organization. So at the top level, the corporate hosting gets developed. That can get broken down to other levels, as I just showed you in the example. And at the frontline level, problem solvings can occur to address those higher level problems, like in Turner's case with safety. They address some frontline problems, and I'll show you some examples right now. One of the other things it does related to leader capability is leaders within the Turner organization at the very top level. I mentioned the senior vice president led this initiative with his general managers. They took responsibility to go out in the field and to see when an incident occurred related to safety, they went to see the problem, to understand why it occurred, what was happening on that particular site. And then based on that, they saw and heard problem solving that occurred. This is one example of problem that occurred related to mortar mixing. And it kind of illustrates the example that one, leaders have to be out in the field to lead by responsibility. They need to know what's happening there. And they need to build capability in the organization. So frontline supervisor developed this particular A3 problem to address mortar mixing. This was causing injuries to backs and causing trips and falls as well in the organization. So that this problem solving is put together for that purpose, to share out and to look at countermeasures that could be put in place. Here's another one. I know you can't read this, but this is an example of a problem solving done around something that's commonly used in construction sites called an A-frame. An A-frame cart is basically a cart that holds drywall on a construction site. Often this was prompted by a situation when an A-frame cart fell over on a supervisor, and actually fell on her legs and broke both of her legs. She ended up in the hospital for several months. But as a result of that, Turner took that very seriously and put in place some countermeasures to address how A-frames got used. They did root cause analysis on why they were being misused, and they found across many sites across the New York and across their whole company, the A-frames were used ineffectively. The steel sheets were, things that weren't supposed to be put on them were put on A-frames. The labels on weight limitations were often, this picture shows here, were often scratched off. You couldn't read. There was no training on how to use them. So this was a specific problem solving that was done to address that safety issue. Another concept back to the PDCA that's introduced in the book is you've got to do mid-year and year-end reflection to determine, did you achieve your objectives, and what's the extent of that achievement? In Turner's case, they found a lot of the causes of the things that they had the issues that existed, and common causes across those A3s were incomplete pre-task plans that I mentioned to you earlier. A lot of times they weren't being used effectively. Saw that when they went in the field. There's often big changes to work plans, so there needed to be more rigor to that planning up front, and changes in conditions on the job site. So over the course of many months of this, like I mentioned to you earlier, these repeat calls, these that were occurring, those co-learning calls, where if a safety incident occurred, they reported out to the senior vice president a resolution. This is the tracking log of all the things that got resolved over the course of that last several months. So they kept that to know, like, that things were being resolved and problems were being solved to root cause, not merely on that job site, but across the New York business unit or across the company. The last concept that's introduced in the book, and that is that you need goes back to this process chart I showed earlier. For Hoshin Kanri to be effective, there needs to be sustainability and a long-term view. It means you have to have standards for how you do Hoshin. You need to go back and look at all these individual components, the inputs, the content, and the outputs, and do a reflection on, is that working well or not? And what do we need to reflect on? And you probably need a long-term commitment from organizations. You will get results from the first year, honestly, when you do Hoshin Kanri, because it focuses the organization on those specific initiatives. But sustained results and significant results require, like any process, for you to follow that process for a period of time. And so in the case of Hoshin, that's a year at minimum. So you want to go through this process several years to see significant impact across the organization. To show you at Turner the impact they got by doing this process and sustaining it over the course of several years, this graph kind of shows you that. That what they use in Turner is, and it's common in some other industries too, they use recordable incident rate as their safety KPI. In 2015, that was at 4.9, which was not good in the industry, and it was actually very high even within Turner. Through some simple countermeasures, they were able to reduce that a bit. But as I showed you in 2019, 2020, when they introduced Hoshin Kanri and really focused the organization on specific efforts to improve, that went from all the way down to this past year was 0.93. So they're now the New York business unit is not only the best in Turner, it's one of the best in the industry for the construction industry. This is some examples of just some other results in other organizations I've worked with. I shared with you in depth more the Turner example, but I've been working with a software company. I'm going to be there actually the week after next, Nuclear Software in India. They're just starting their second year of Hoshin, but they've taken what they call mean time to resolution of bug request, which is basically if there's a bug in the software and it goes out to a customer will come back to them and say, I have a bug in the software. It used to require them close to 2 weeks to get a resolution on that problem. They now do that within a day. So if a customer contacts them, they resolve that issue and now, obviously you want to eliminate bugs altogether, and they're working on that too. GE Appliances is another organization that the Lean Enterprise Institute has helped over the course of, more than a decade. I was an integral part of that. And GE has done significant improvement to their business, particularly in North America, over the course of the last decade. It's doubled. They are now the #1 appliance company in the US. They've added a lot of jobs, and they've grown their supply base. So, Ben, that's what I had to share. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have questions, I think Ben's going to field them, and I'm happy to share more in depth about anything I just explained, or if you have other topics or questions for me, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, wonderful, Mark. We'll let some questions come through on the chat and Q&A. Just really impressive to hear your expertise on this and the depth of this topic, and hopefully demystifies it as well for some of us who maybe aren't as familiar with it. So one, I guess, initial question, Mark, to get us going. I know some companies use OKRs and that objective key results. And I think Google is a case study of that. And I guess I was just curious, how would you differentiate between Hoshin and OKRs, or what other maybe general strategy deployment type frameworks you hear of?
Well, yeah, I'm actually working with a healthcare organization that uses OKRs right now. I think that methodology can be helpful. I don't know if it goes into depth relative to the things I just explained, particularly relative to how you develop capability of people and leaders, how you do frontline problem solving. This is all was significant part of Hoshin Kanri. One of the things, so I think, anyway, as long as organizations take those things into consideration, the concept of OKRs can be helpful. But remember that the OKR is a acronym for objectives and key results. And so organizations, I think I just shared with you some of the objectives that were developed by Turner, for example, or you'll see them or in the case study as well. I shared some case study examples. And those, there needs to be thought put into what the objective is, not merely what the key result is. And I've noticed in some organizations that I don't believe, actually I have a copy of the book right now by the gentleman who wrote the book about OKRs, Measure What Matters, John Doerr. I think if you read that book, he doesn't just talk about making measures, but unfortunately, many organizations tend to devolve into, let's just build a KPI around it. And one of the things I want to distinguish in my book that's clear is KPIs are for daily management. Those are things you can measure on a daily basis. Let's define strategies separately and as things and for the focus of the organization and leadership, and to define things longer term that we need to achieve as an organization.
Very good. Yeah, that's helpful. Anton has a question here for you, Mark, around what are the conditions?
No questions from Anton. No, I'm just kidding. Anton.
You can choose if you want to answer.
Nice to hear from you, Anton.
So what are your conditions that have to be met by your client or the organization requesting it before you will work with them on Hoshin Kanri?
Well, let me answer that question, Anton, not by saying my conditions, but I think and I share this in the book. I mean, for this to be successful, an organization, it requires leadership and engagement. And I think one of the things I talk about, because what's the responsibility of leadership to define the future of the company, right? I think that's a pretty important responsibility. So if it's only a continuous improvement group that's kind of leading this effort, it's not going to work. Leadership has to be involved. Now, one of the other things I speak to in my book is that it's okay to not start at the whole company. I mean, Turner, the example I gave you from Turner, they're a $25 billion organization. I recommended when I worked with them to start in their New York business unit. It was a large part of their organization, but not the whole part. And it relates to another maybe precondition is that we had a very engaged leader at the top, a senior vice president Turner called Charlie. His name's Charlie Murphy. He was the head of that organization. He was really engaged, and that's why it was successful. So you need that's one, I would say, precondition. I would also just say the organizations need to be willing and able to pull away from, this is particularly true in the US, from this idea that we're going to change the direction of our strategy and company every 3 months based on our fiscal results. I think that has to be kind of a condition as well. But I think those are the primary ones. And I have not turned away a lot of organizations who are looking for help, large and small, different industries.
Maybe a follow-up to that, and Sepa, I see your hand up, but Mark, would you say if companies are thinking about this, and obviously it can be a very powerful application on an annual basis or looking a couple of years out in the future, but if you're saying what's a simple way I could get started with Hoshin Kanri kind of today or somewhere in the middle of Q3 like we are, at least on the calendar, what would be some practical ways you could see with the leadership team or management team starting this behavior?
Well, if there is an inclination from the CEO, I would start with a conversation with the leadership team on like how to try out maybe how to pilot it somewhere. if there's not necessarily involvement with CEO, but maybe there's a leader who is interested in this methodology at some level, it could be a plant manager, a vice president of a function, you can pilot it within that function. In the book, there is the case actually takes you through the company True Mowers. They piloted Hoshin Kanri in one of their plants in the previous year. There's a lot of good outcomes from that plant. And so the CEO reviewed those results, talked a lot with the plant manager of that who had piloted it in his plant. And she made the determination, the CEO made the determination that they were going to try it over the course of the coming year. So I would say the recommendation is like, think of an area in your organization where this might work as a pilot. It's going to require some effort to put in place the methodology and to engage the team and the leadership within whatever area of the business you're focusing on. But that's all explained in the book.
Good. Seppo, if you have a question, you want to come off of mute and go ahead and ask her.
All right. Thanks, Ben. And thanks so much, Mark, for that presentation. I really enjoyed at the beginning when you took us through your onboarding experience when you joined Toyota, which actually takes me, because I kind of seen there seems to be a lot of focus on people development, investment in people development and Toyota at the levels that doesn't seem to be in other organizations. The fact that, you spend your first 6 months being exposed to the business. And when you started, you were also assigned a mentor to help you in problem solving. And when I've also listened to other stories, how each time, as people progressed, they had coach, someone assigned to them to tell them, not good, Maxan, not good. So it's a question of what level of success do we, can organization achieve with Hoshin Kanri if without, that level of investment in people development? What would you say to that?
Zero. People development is everything. Now, I don't want to say that Toyota was an organization that focused tenaciously on results too. But Toyota also focused on the process to get that result. That's what I showed you in that, kind of the inputs and outputs of the process of Hoshin Kanri. And the process is something that requires people to execute on that process, to do that process. And those people, anyone in any situation is going to come to a process with probably a new process anyway, with learning required. And so, I think that, so I hope and thank you for calling. I really appreciate that question a lot, because I believe I emphasized people development a lot in this presentation, even with Turner. Turner recognized that too, with the whole problem solving effort. Organizations, for this to be successful, have to focus on development. And I think particularly Hoshin Kanri can be really helpful for leader development, because it asks for many reasons, some of which I explained in my presentation. But it's also a really important reason is if you think most organizations, if you're thinking about the 3 to 5 high-level objectives of an organization, business objectives, they're not going to be unique to a silo in an organization. Like the example in the book is the launching an electric mower for the True Mowers company. Well, the product development has to be involved, of course, because to get the mower developed, but you have to produce it, you have to manufacture it, you have to sell it. So that means that any given leader assigned, Toyota used the methodology of Hoshin Kanri to assign a leader with responsibility across all, who would lead that initiative across all the functions. And so that requires, we didn't change the organization. It requires the leader kind of lead by what I call responsibility instead of authority. And I think, it's kind of similar to a sports team. If you're the captain of a sports team, you probably didn't get that because you like the player who's been there the longest. You're the player that demonstrates the most capability and maybe to do the sport or to the skill of that, but also to lead others. And that's a concept, I think, behind Hoshin Kanri and the leadership development that was true in Toyota. But just to circle back to your question again, I mean, I think people development, Toyota, one of the things I treasure day to day that I worked in Toyota for 23 years is it was a journey of development for me. It was hard sometimes. The development isn't just I don't want people to misunderstand. This isn't like go to a training class. This is development through that. You brought up the point of the mentoring. It's development through mentoring. Sometimes it's difficult. You're expected to achieve like business results from the development, from the work that you do, but there is always a manager or a mentor there, and even peers within the organization who are willing to step in and support your learning. And sometimes that's challenging learning. It's not always like it's one of the core tenets of the Toyota Way when we developed it back in 2001 was challenge. So we ask people to take responsibilities to solve problems, but we're willing leaders to step in and help them resolve those problems too. That was a long answer, I know. I get kind of excited about that topic, honestly.
Naturally so.
If there are no hands, I'm happy to ask another question. Is that okay?
For now, you're good, Seb, but go ahead.
All right, thanks again. So then I'd like you to just maybe share what do you think is this basic mindset that Toyota has that seems to just puzzle, I guess, a lot of organizations where, because you also shared that you were part of the Toyota supplier, development, how an organization decides to train other, its suppliers and potentially other organizations who may be potentially even be its competitors. Or I don't know if maybe you could even share how TSSC what are the terms for receiving that training. But I'm also just thinking about what would be that basic mindset that is in an organization that says we're going to open up a function that helps to build the capability of other organizations.
Okay, well, you kind of asking several questions there. I think one question, the fundamental mindset of why develop people is Toyota believes that, it's one of the 4 tenets of the Toyota production system. People are the most important asset. This means, yeah, you can spend money to buy machines. Now we have machine learning, so maybe that's a little different. But people are a expandable asset. We have a limitless. It's demonstrated every day in every country around the world. People have limitless capability. People do amazing things, and if we nurture that capability, and thinking that I want this person to work their career at Toyota, not just this year, and I'm not going to lay them off either. That's another fundamental thing. I'm not going to lay them off next year. I'm going to develop their capability to grow. And I know I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that my boss told me, you're not expected to add value the first 3 years. Oh, I stayed 23 years. I believe definitely for 20 years, I added value to the organization because I was developed by a lot of good people through the course of that time. And I developed others. It's a fundamental tenet that's what you do for people. This is like a good for mankind thing. This is not just about like an individual thing. I know that as a person, I'm a better person because I worked in Toyota. I'm a better person because the wonderful wife I have too. I'm not going to claim it's all due to my career, but I do believe it has a lot to do with that experience. Now, why would Toyota help others like TSSC, the other half of your question? Well, Toyota believes this for the exact same reason I just said, that this makes organizations better. And this is Lean Enterprise Institutes. Toyota believes that TPS, when adopted by a company and taken on and thoroughly adopted, that it makes organizations better. Organizations employ people. People, if they're employed, can be healthy contributors to the economy, to the growth of a country. So I think if you like, Toyota has that fundamental thinking. So sharing this know-how with others outside their organization, I believe, was I think it's a very unique thing Toyota continues to do, but I think it makes a lot of impact to people in many different industries across the world.
All right,
Very
thank
good.
you.
Sure.
Mark, as we're waiting for any final questions here, a couple ways just to take next steps for our participants. Obviously, we would love to send you a link to either check out the book or purchase the book. Obviously, we'd love people to do that. Are there other things you could recommend or other opportunities perhaps to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested, I shared with you, of course, you have, I'll just reconfirm, you have I think that the book is helpful because it is a practical workbook to use this methodology. But I'm an integral part of the Lean Enterprise Institute. I'm still active. Like I mentioned to you earlier, I'm headed to India the end of next week. And so I'm still working with organizations. I'm happy to talk with anyone who would be interested in learning more. There's a lot of resources. I would say go to lean.org also. That's our website where there is a lot of good articles and information about Hoshinkanri and other topics that are free. I mean, they're based on, and we also have, we offer classes. There's a class on Hoshinkanri. You can find that on our website, lean.org also, for this topic. There's a case study. It's a case study class that takes you into depth about how an organization applies a Hoshinkanri, allows you to develop it your kind of through the course of the case study on your own as well. So I think those are some good avenues to pursue for those who are interested in learning further.
Very good. Well, let's adjourn for today. And Mark, thank you again for your time. We will send out a link to everybody with the recording from today, along with a link to the book and the other references you mentioned. But appreciate everybody coming together for this Friday afternoon. And Mark, thank you again for your time. And we'll talk to everybody here soon.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Good luck.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.